So it looks like Netanyahu is losing patience when it comes to negotiating with Hamas, or maybe just finally realizing what the moral goal of this war should have been from the start, and it's the occupation of Gaza. Now, we'll talk about specifically what this might mean, especially since we don't really have that much information about the specifics, as well as it's not technically fully decided yet, although once a prime minister is behind something and has defense minister behind somebody, behind something as well, there's usually not much you can do about it, although the command of the IDF seems to be against it. So we'll talk about that as well as potential reactions and everything around that. Welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is Nicolas Provenzo. Thank you for joining me today. And yeah, so we'll go into it in just a bit. But Nicolas, what are your just opening thoughts?
I think it's a positive sign. I think that the goal of the war, as you stated, has to be to remove Hamas as both a military force and a cultural force. And they haven't surrendered. They should have surrendered a long time ago. That has yet to occur. I don't think it will. And so, what is required? I think for Israel's own security, it requires occupying them and installing a new, legitimate, rights based civil order. I guess the caveat that I have, the concern is like if you go back to the U.S. occupation of Iraq, the U.S. imposed a constitution upon Iraq. And part of that constitution had this lovely clause that says Islam is a key source of inspiration. I forget the exact language, but it basically says Islam is a relevant political force for this new government, which I think was a huge mistake. And it legitimizes the inappropriate mingling, and there is no appropriate mingling of church and state and mosque and state here. And so my concern is does Israel have, for the lack of the better words, the stones to actually see and impose upon the Gaza Strip the solution to the years and years and years of trouble? And that is fundamentalists, well, I wouldn't even say fundamentalists, Islamists believing that they have the right to impose their creed by force. They have the right to destroy the Jews as such. And, so are the Israelis going to be willing to take over the schools? Are the Israelis going to be willing to fire and punish those who advocate violence and use violence? Does Israel have the political support to do what is necessary to have a successful occupation? And I think there are examples in history where there have been successful occupations. Germany and Japan were both successfully occupied by the Allies, and what came out was vastly better than what existed before. I have that hope for the Gaza Strip, but at the same time, it's been a long time since there's been a successful occupation. And so I wonder if the culture has the stomach for what it would take.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things you mentioned I want to definitely get to later. Now, I think when you talked about sort of Islamist nature currently in Gaza, the fact is that this is absolutely applauded by most of the Western countries right now. Because who is talking about it? Who is talking about basically removing that sort of influence from the Palestinian society? It's always about self-determination. It's always about, well, two-state solution. It's never about, well, but what kind of state? Like, you can say, as Macron said a few days ago, that he wants I don't remember exact quote, but something like a Palestinian state that recognizes freedom, human dignity, and all that. But like, what do you do when the people do not recognize that? What
When the
it
culture
doesn't matter
itself
what,
rejects that.
yeah,
Yeah.
what does it matter if you like write it there? Just quickly, I quickly put in ChatGPT what it had, the Iraqi constitution, and apparently in Article 2 it said Islam is the official religion of the state and is the foundation source of legislation. So already, I think even the current Syrian constitution has a similar thing, which is basically, yeah, the fact that Sharia law is the fundamental way of interpreting law, which again, it's nothing about individual rights, it's nothing about freedom. It's
You
simply
start out the
oppression.
gate politically. You start out the gate broken, which then just shows how bad both the epistemology is in that region and in the West, that we're comfortable with it, that Americans or any Westerner doesn't see the huge flaw in basing a system on Sharia law, and doesn't recognize, as Ayn Rand brilliantly observed, faith and force are corollaries. In the absence of an ability to point to reality and say, this is why what I believe is true, it's just dueling faiths, and whoever is the most violent who wins. So that's my concern. So superficially, yeah, it's wonderful. They're going to occupy and hopefully pacify Gaza. You know, a lot. I think if they do that, a lot of the criticism that they're getting about the starvation and whatnot will evaporate, because I blame Hamas for that, in that it uses food as a tool of subjugation of its own people. So I think having Israel in charge on a corner by street corner basis removes Hamas from the equation, and I think things will go a lot better. But that's collateral. The heart of the matter is the West willing to recognize what actually drives the violence here? And when you're doing things like, again, and I know you guys have covered it extensively, recognizing or putting out recognizing a Palestinian state, when the only thing that has occurred in the past 2 years is unspeakable violence committed by the would-be governors, operators of that state, you have a massive disconnect between what's going on and what would actually engender peace, and that's horrific. So, I feel like I got burned on the first, the invasion of Iraq, and supporting the Republicans in the United States in regards to that. Oh, this is going to work out, and in reality, it worked out quite badly at great cost in lives and treasure. And it did, because you again had a political establishment that did not want to label the problem, and that problem being political Islam. And the United States successfully labeled the problem in Japan when it identified the religious militarism that was animating the Japanese government and the Japanese empire, and imposed a constitution and demanded that church and state be separate entities, and resisted the idea that the emperor was a god. It brought him back down to earth. And that was a tremendous achievement, but it required a certain will. Does the West, does Israel have that same will to identify the problems and impose solutions? Because that's basically what they have a right to. They have the right to impose solutions for their own security. And that is an open question. I'm guarded at best.
Again, just one comment on the Iraq war. When it came to sort of the what should have been the number one goal, if that war was even to happen, is to simply remove the regime, right? And that happened pretty quickly, pretty successfully. And then we were like, well, okay, what do we do now? We have no idea. Winning hearts and minds. Yeah, pretty much right after that, there was no clear vision of what there is to be after that.
I am told by a
Yeah,
very good friend of mine who served in the Iraqi war that when he entered with his men, they were greeted, they were cheered, they were welcomed. And so how they lost that, if that's true, and I believe him to be incredibly credible, so I believe what he says, uh, why was it lost, and what was allowed to fill it, the empty space that existed? And I would argue that that was good old fashioned Islam. And as long as you tolerate that, as long as you don't identify the problems there, you're doomed to fail. And I mean, there's so much evocative footage of children being brainwashed, like I cannot wait to murder a Jew, and I'll, just horrific stuff that you would just shocks the conscience, really, at least mine, to not analyze and explain just why that is wrong. I mean, I think they show it, but I never really, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't feel like you hear the forceful argument why that is philosophically wrong. Why that, it's almost like you point to it, it's evil. Yeah, it is true. That is evil, and it's wrong, and it's vile. But why is it evil? And what should take its place? And how would you do it? Those are really the questions that we have to ask if we're going to deliver Gaza into a better future. And again, this is I think it's completely animated by Israel's own self-interest. Israel would be a safer, better, happier place if it didn't have the thorn of this problem perennially at its side. Now, with occupation on the table, there is an opportunity to once and for all pacify this violent movement. And again, how do you do it? How do you compel it? And what did they do in Germany? I think one of the interesting things they did was show the civilian population the fruits of the Nazi ideology. So they saw the films of the camps. I think that, the mom who got the phone call from her jihadist son bragging that he had just slaughtered a whole bunch of Jews needs to see the effects of her child's actions and come to her own conclusion that this was either a good thing or a bad thing. But I think, she needs to be brought to the table and presented. You unleashed your son to do this, and he called you and he bragged about you, and this is what it looks like. And also, this is what it looks like because look at your own neighborhood now, because nobody with half a brain is going to tolerate that kind of violence loosed against themselves. So not only have you wrought destruction on the side of the Israelis, which apparently you're quite pleased with, but you've wrought retaliation. And this is what that retaliation looks like. And you can't expect anything different. But now, here today, you have a choice. You can renounce that and rejoin civilization, and you'll be embraced, you'll be cheered, you'll be assisted every stretch of the way. But if you continue on the path you're on, there's only one way this ends, and that will be your destruction, because we're not going to sacrifice our lives in order to preserve yours. When your goal, when you're willing to send your boys to slaughter us with impunity, and then get the phone call, oh, that's great, Junior, I'm so proud. And if Israel is willing to have that conversation on such a personal level, I think that it'll be here for the next 1,000 years. If it's not, then we just have more and more bloodshed, more violence. They always talk about the cycle of violence. Well, failing to deal with the core problems perpetuates a cycle of violence. And what do we have here? We have an ideology that says, I get to impose my creed by force because. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned sort of playing um, the concentration camps footage to German civilians, and I think there was one Palestinian poll that had a question something like, "Have you watched the footage of October 7, and what do you think?" And there was a change when it comes to sort of the way Palestinians were feeling. I'm trying to find it now, so maybe I'll bring it up later if I can find it. But yeah, I mean, the biggest problem is, I mean, I can mention a different poll that I've seen that basically the support of Hamas or sort of basically the approval rating of Hamas in May was 33%. Now imagine if you are in Nazi Germany in April 1945 and approval for the Nazi party is at 33%. Now, something must have really failed when it came to how the war was waged. The fact that not the regime that made it actually happen is not the one being blamed for it. And this is exactly what we're seeing. we made an episode where we talked about how when the people are talking about starvation in Gaza, well, that's fault of Israel because Israel is supposed to deliver aid. And then there was a footage of Israeli hostage that Hamas released, and well, that's fault of Israel because Israel should make a ceasefire to get the hostages back. So the world has been pushing this, that basically this is all on Israel, and Palestinians are upholding that, right? They are not feeling the consequences of the war. They are feeling, I mean, if you want to make a comparison to the welfare state, right? The entitlement is there, right? This is not a privilege I'm
Right.
getting, the fact that I'm being delivered aid during a war from my enemy. No, this is something I deserve. This is something that should happen. And if it is, that's the problem. The fact that I was denied that. So everything is on Israel. The fact that aid is delivered is on Israel. The fact that aid isn't delivered is on Israel. So you have this population that their government has failed them, you could say. It declared war on an enemy it wasn't able to fight. It was basically wiped out. If we take all the sort of numbers from Hamas and destruction of Hamas, then Gaza is leveled. More than 60,000 people have died, or 200,000 if you count the people under the rubble, as they like to say. And
Right.
yet, Hamas enjoys like not that like what is the average American
More
president
popularity
like
than it should. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, what is the average American like approval rating of a president? Like 50%
Trump, I
is
thought it was
like pretty good.
39%. I last searched
Well,
39%. Yeah.
yeah, and so you see this yeah, I mean, what do you make of that? I
Yeah,
want to,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. You've nailed the question in my mind too, because I'm always, so this whole October 7th and the aftermath was calculated, and the idea that our victimhood will get us what we want. Because how dare the Israel, the bully, torment us, even though we put their children in ovens and, called mom and bragged about it. It shows how horrific the state of the culture is, that they thought they could even get away with it, that this was a viable plan. And so the question I have always is why don't our ideas resonate more clearly with the people in the world, with the culture? Why don't we have more of a cultural impact? When to me it seems very clear. I mean, which side initiates violence, which side has the ideology that perpetuates violence, which side would prefer peace, which side is more open and tolerant of dissent. All these questions resolve resoundingly in Israel's favor. How could it even be an issue? And yet it is. And it's not Colombia being taken over by a bunch of disgruntled objectivists who are politely protesting while respecting everybody's property rights, but quite the opposite. I mean, that's the question of our era. Why? And why are voices for the good having such a hard time swaying debate? You would think that, again, war is interesting. One of my favorite movies in showing the horror of war is Downfall. And Downfall is the one where the meme where Hitler's with his generals and they're moving phantom armies about. But if you look at the entire movie, what it really shows is people coming to the realization that the thing they believed in was dead and bad, and they're having to confront it metaphysically because their entire worldview is falling apart around them, to the degree that in this famous scene Hitler is ranting and raving about the phantom armies that he thinks he controls but don't even exist and have no ability to project force anymore. And it ends with the young secretary now, showing her in real life as an elderly woman, remarking about how common everything was, but stunned that she was so close to this, what was revealed to her as a monster. And what ultimately revealed it to her? Well, it's shown off page. The realization of what Germany wrought, what the Nazis wrought, and what it wrought them too. So that's the corollary. What it wrought them, their own interest, was knocked down or frustrated by Hitler's machinations. It's interesting that the Israelis have come so far in that they believe that they can occupy Gaza. And I don't think that was that hard militarily. I think they could have done that earlier. They could have declared this much earlier. So then what's changed? Are their ideas changing? Are they coming to a realization here? Is this a cultural inflection point, or is it just going to be more of the same? I don't see the evidence for a cultural inflection point. I just don't, and I'm guessing you'd agree, but where are the arguments? And why are our arguments not capturing more interest, attention? That's the frustrating and an open question in my mind. And I don't have a ready answer, because if I did, I'd be doing it.
Yeah, I mean, sort of pulling back to the topic. Both Netanyahu, the prime minister, and Israel Katz, the defense minister, the defense minister specifically said today that the IDF will carry out the policy government decides on, which is usually how military works. They simply do what the
Yeah.
commander-in-chief
You
says,
don't want a
unless
military that does its own thing.
unless it goes really against probably the constitution, although Israel doesn't have one, so it's a bit problematic. But yeah, so there is the sort of unsureness of what the IDF is going to do, although the expectation would be they would carry this out. Now, there is supposed to be, I think there was supposed to be a meeting today about this. Now, I think they might have moved it. I'll try to check again the news if there are any updates, or if somebody wants to tell me in the chat. But I want to talk a little bit more. Now, this is speculation, because although we probably know what it actually means, because occupation can mean two things. Are we talking about long-term occupation of Gaza leading towards potential annexation? Or are we talking about occupation where, especially with some of the words by Israel Katz, it seemed to be a little bit more of, well, we just want to be present, so when something happens, we can quickly act. But this is not enough. And if this is all we're gonna do, I think unfortunately you might as well just go back, because you're simply risking more IDF lives, or not even risking IDF lives. You will sacrifice more IDF lives for basically nothing, because only full-on occupation leading to annexation, resettlement Israelis who want to go live in Gaza. Again, because you cannot just sort of like govern a place from afar, you need to have your people there. You need to have people there, so you can have police there, so you can have actually people who have interest in basically making sure the security is there. This is not something as far as I understand, this is not something Israel was doing before the disengagement, before 2005, that basically you had sort of Jewish settlements, Jewish communities, but you had Rafah, you had Gaza City, which were pretty much a no-go area for any Jews. Basically, yes, this is part of Israel. Yes, Israeli law technically applies there, but don't go there, because this is not going to be safe for you. Deborah in the chat says, "Don't call it occupation. Israel taking back their land is decolonization." It's still occupation. I don't know what else would you call it. Like, if it's a part of your country that is not fully governed, meaning you didn't annex it yet, and it's not fully basically the Israeli law on its own, in its whole thing, is not fully applied there. I'm not sure what else you could call it than occupation, especially if you technically have already given it up before and are now taking it back. Now, technically, if Ukraine takes back Crimea, I guess we wouldn't call that occupation since they are taking back their land. So maybe the same thing could apply here. But I would still imagine there's going to be like a military occupation, right? It's not like when if Ukraine ever takes back Crimea or Donetsk and Luhansk, that like it's gonna be everything back to the normal because we are talking about back to the normal going like 10 years, right? And here in Gaza we're talking about back to the normal, and the normal wasn't even good because like Gaza technically, depending on how you ask, wasn't fully annexed, right? The Gazans that
Yeah,
not Israeli
you
citizens.
don't want to go back, and I mean, you couldn't pay me to live there if I were Israeli or anything. I mean, I don't think there has to be a forward. I mean, with Germany and Japan, you had with Japan a imposed pacifistic tradition and an economic focus, and with Germany, you had membership in NATO and a commitment to Western style republic form of government, and those were imposed. And we didn't stay there forever. We left, and the ties were voluntary. It was trade, mutual agreement, mutual exchange. How you engender that in Gaza, I think, is going to be much harder, but still possible. I mean, what's the difference between Gazans and Japanese who are willing to send young pilots to do kamikaze raids on the American fleet? I mean, there was the same fanaticism, the same fervent belief in ideology and the emperor and worship of the state and negation of the self. All those things were in place. Uh,
Just quickly, because somebody tried. Germans had just been liberals like 20 years prior. It's very different in that case, I think. I don't think Germany was ever a liberal democracy, even before Nazi Germany, the way we think about. The
well,
Weimar
you had
Germany,
Bismarck and Blood and Iron, and you
and
had
even Weimar Germany had still been very, we would call like paternalistic and even like authoritarian to a certain degree. Like we are not talking about America, UK, or even
yeah,
really
they weren't
France for
turning
that
people
matter.
into soap, but they at the same time they were nothing to write home about. There was a reason why Weimar Germany failed.
And Japan had nothing even close to that.
Japan, what I mean, the only thing that I think Japan had that was different was a fervent desire to be an industrial power. And so I think that the Allies were able to successfully capitalize on that. They were always interested in industrialization. They envied the industrialization. They wanted resources and they were willing to impose an empire in order to get it. Once we said no empire, but you can still have industrialization. You just won't be able to do it through the barrel of a gun. That was a brilliant redirection if you take what I'm saying with as true. Um, what's different here? There's no Islamic based society that produces much of value outside of oil, which one would argue could just as easily be, exploited by someone else. So do they even have the technological ability to do that? So that's a big hurdle to overcome, because so it just shows they're not culturally animated by this worldly desire for the fruits of productivity. And I think that's actually because if you could say, look, if you abandon this pretense that you have the right to slaughter Israelis, which shouldn't be a hard ask, but if you abandon that, the world would be so much better for you because you can focus on different things. You can build, you can create, you can live freely, you can educate your children. No one will bother you because that's a private sphere. You just have to abandon your pretense. You'd think that would be not a hard sell. Like, yeah, maybe it's not a good idea for me to go and pine for these, murderous things. That's the problem, and maybe it's the problem isn't so much them as it is us not successfully selling these virtues, not successfully believing in them ourselves. And I mean, Name me
Yeah,
someone other than an objectivist who defends productivity as a virtue, who celebrates it.
yeah, I was about to say it's not that we are failing to convince them. We are not even trying to, right? We are decrying the state of America right now. I've recently just seen Elizabeth Warren talking about Mamdani as the Democratic Party needs to be like Mamdani.
More like him, yeah.
Now, Mamdani is like a full-on socialist, not even hiding it, and probably hiding his power level and being like a full-on communist for that matter, calling for complete rent controls, calling for government involvement in food. This is we've seen that
Yeah, yeah,
before.
yeah.
It didn't end up nicely, and she's talking about half of the country or sort of half of the political representation of America should be that. So this is a complete. And I think she also calls herself a capitalist. I'm not sure if she still does, but I know
Oh,
she
that's
at least
rich.
at least at least in 2020, she did call herself as the capitalist candidate. And, she's just trying to fix the problems with capitalism.
Yeah,
And this is exactly what you're getting, right?
yeah, yeah. I frame those as people who want the benefits of capitalism. So this guy in New York likes skyscrapers, and but at the same time wants to have government-run grocery stores. So if all of a sudden the skyscrapers started to disappear, I don't think he'd change his tune, but he'd start. He certainly would miss the fruits that he wants to command. Uh, yeah, it shows how bad the vacuum is, and we see it all the time. The examples you brought up are good ones. I think of like just close to home where you're on the HOA message board and someone's talking about pristine nature over the fact that we live in this city and actually take up space. Like, oh, I saw the deer and it's wonderful. They're coming back in the city, and like deer in the city. What are you talking about? Yeah, and again, that circles back to the thing that we talked about right when we opened the discussion was, does the West have the intellectual base to actually articulate a better future for the Gazans? To say here's a competing view that you should embrace out of your own selfish interest. Here it is. It's called freedom, individual rights, liberalism, capitalism. Be rich with us, be happy with us, be peaceful with us. Because once you embrace these virtues, we will draw no distinction about your past, your creed, your anything. We will embrace you as a friend. We will trade with you. We will, we'll intermarry, everything. Everything's open to you. But you have to renounce this pretense that you get to impose yourself by force. And I just don't, again, it's frightening how you don't see that alternative presented clearly and convincingly. And without it, I think that the program is ultimately doomed.
Yeah, and just quickly, since we are on the topic on sort of America, somebody said we are giving rich people 1.4 trillion per year in interest income on treasuries. That's far worse than the New York City mayoral candidate. Which there's so many things like wrong with that. One, if rich people weren't buying the U.S. treasuries, U.S. would go bankrupt. Like because of how much the interest rates would have to go up for those treasuries for the rest of them, America would absolutely do bankrupt. And second, American government doesn't have to borrow money if it like doesn't want to. People are taking it because America is giving it. Like, make a balanced budget, which wouldn't be enough because you need a surplus budget to actually pay off the debt. Technically, draw out of that eventually. But again, nobody's forcing American government to spend so much. Nobody's calling for it. Well, people are calling
Oh,
for it. I shouldn't
yeah,
say
yeah.
that.
People are calling for it. They're just, like, oh, the money comes from the magic land where money comes from.
Yeah,
Oh.
but again, and the same person said income disparity has to be fixed in the U.S. Again, the problem it's not like America doesn't have problems, but I really like. I'm not sure if you follow uh, on Facebook, but I think he has a really good observation about how the left recognizes the problem and has terrible solutions for it, and the right tries to act if there is no problem. And absolutely, there is a problem in America, and everybody is offering a terrible solutions, so the problems keep getting worse, right? Nobody like one thing like housing, right? Everybody says, well, housing should be cheaper, but as soon as you start telling, well, can we build a high-rise building in your neighborhood? Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay,
Oh yeah, yeah.
let's not get crazy here.
Yeah, well,
We
I live
need.
in Alexandria, Virginia, and that is the story, our day-to-day story. Okay, do you think you can live right across the street, right across the river from Washington D.C. and not have people want to build? And you think that you're going to have low cost solutions when you forbid this kind of construction, that kind of construction, and the third kind of construction? Good luck. You live in a magic land, and let me know how well that works for you. But yeah, I mean, there's a thousand different problems on any given day in America on that level. And again, I guess the Hamas Israel conflict is a way of concretizing just how bad the problem is. Because again, when you're having a dispute where I circle back to it, babies get put in the oven and then mom gets called in a brag call. Uh, and you can't resolve who the problem is here and what's animating them, you're not on a strong foundation. And it'd be interesting to look. I haven't looked at the latest figures, like what is America's support for Israel right now. I'm
I
surprised
think
how mixed it is.
I think it dropped below 50% when it comes to. I think the question was, do you support the Israeli actions in Gaza? And that recently dropped below 50%, much lower between Democrats than Republicans, as you would expect. We have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. A super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. Okay, I hate reading so many chats, but somebody said there is no need to involve third parties in between the Treasury and the Fed. The monetary implications are the same. How do you think that works? What do you mean not have any third parties? Like that money has to come from somewhere. That money is not like magically put into existence. So like I don't really understand what you mean by sort of like that money not coming from anywhere. Because yeah, that if you are talking about straight up, the government should just print money that it needs to spend. Well, good luck with that.
Buy
It's not
more
like,
America. Get ready
yeah,
for it. Yeah.
like they
Well,
said,
maybe they think
yeah.
that we should be raising taxes and balance the budget that way. I don't know. I would like to see us not spend so much.
Well, so I have a few things that I wanted to bring up since we are talking about this, and the next part was the hostages. Now, a chief analyst with Channel 12, Amit Sega, said Hamas won't release more hostages without total surrender and won't surrender. If we don't act now, the hostages will starve to death and Gaza will remain under Hamas's control. And we've seen a similar sentiment coming out of Netanyahu, basically saying, okay, Hamas doesn't want to deal, then that's over. If we are to even back in hostages, and that has been sort of used the justification for the occupation, that basically we are just going fully in and we find those hostages. Now, the sort of, I don't want to say counter argument because this is not an argument, this is threat of force. But basically, there are sources saying that Hamas is, and I think even former hostages have said that Hamas and to execute them. So this is the worry that is clear, that basically if Israel goes fully in, that they might get executed. With this wouldn't be the first time it happened. We've seen that before, where was going into one of the tunnels and they found, I don't remember the number, I think about 5 hostages who were killed, I think the day off or the day before, because they were about to be rescued. So again, this is really unfortunate. The goal of the war, unfortunately, can't be the hostages. As sad as it, Bonnie says 4. It might have been 4. I was thinking 4 or 5. The goal of the war is to be to make sure this doesn't happen again. And I think something we've seen in the past is that military action actually was the thing that secured the hostages. If we remember the first and the biggest deal, now the deal itself was still a problem, but if we do remember it, that was the most hostages Israel ever got from Hamas. I think it wasn't it like the hostages for either 100 or 150 Palestinians. So that was compared to anything we had recently, that was a great deal. Not to mention several hostages that have been rescued from Gaza itself. So again, if you ever hope to get some hostages back, I think military action should be the choice you take. And even then, hostages should never be the first priority, but are sort of being used as a justification here. Nicholas, any thoughts on this?
Well, I think you got a lot to unpack. Just trying to lay out what a good strategy would be. I agree. They can't be the. It's horrific because you obviously empathize with their situation, their families, what they're enduring, what their families are enduring is just horrific. You want to have a happy ending. The question is how to get it without compromising a greater value. And the lopsided prisoner exchanges just look bad because it just encourages future violence. Because again, one Israeli life is worth 100 uh, terrorist lives. That's a bad calculus, and it's not going to result in a better future. I think I always struggle with, well, how big is Gaza and where are they and why don't we know it? And what would it take to get that intelligence? And that's also an interesting thing is there is resistance to Hamas. I don't think it's effective resistance, but it exists. And how would you exploit that in order to find a happier ending? If you're earning the loyalty of the population by providing foodstuffs or resources or things that they need, could you break Hamas's back that way? What are the arrows in your quiver, to go to an analogy we're using before, that you could use to effectuate a happy ending for the hostages, but without compromise? And that's the key thing, without a compromise of a greater value. You can't lay down the foundation that this kind of terrorism works. And that's what I hate about the decision in France and Canada to recognize a Palestinian state. You can't legitimize that violence and expect to see a world free of that violence downstream. So you can't really negotiate for the hostages. You just have to demand or effectuate their release. And if they're murdered, there needs to be a proper accounting for that murder under the rules of warfare. So, there's a legitimate acts of reprisal and lawful acts of reprisal. And the problem is that Israel is constantly getting pounded in the nose every time it acts boldly and rationally and appropriately. And that goes to the larger problem of, does the West have the stones, the intelligence, the principles to actually defend itself against? I mean, it should be pretty clear, people who want to impose their religion by force. So that we're even here asking these questions just shows how dark and benighted the times are. And I'm glad for this opportunity to make an argument against.
Yeah, I mean, well, you said about sort of like how big is Gaza, and the fact is that Gaza is really small. I was there. Well, I wasn't in Gaza, but I was on the Israeli side in Sderot, which is you can like see north of Gaza from there, and we took a drive sort of like south along the border, and I think the whole drive is about 40 minutes, like from the
Right.
top of Gaza to the bottom to the Egyptian border. Yet the fact is that the Palestinian population again, we still have no, maybe it did happen, but we have no knowledge of any Palestinians pretty much giving any information about the state, location, or how are the hostages doing. Um, we know hostages have been taken through hospitals, through tunnels under hospitals. Hostages have been held in civilian houses. So Palestinian population has been complicit in holding the hostages, and we haven't gotten anything from it. Again, I think I'm not sure if there is a reward right now, but throughout this war, I know that there's been several rewards that basically, if there is some information towards releasing the hostages or rescuing the hostages, you'll get a ticket out of Gaza. You'll get like 500,000. I think there were several sort of like offers like that, and we
All right.
still haven't seen anything. So the fact that, especially when it comes to Arab population, that in the past, when it comes to Arab militaries, were super corrupt and were happy to jump on any opportunity to get out of their country like that. The fact that this is still going on, that the Palestinian population is so, in a sense, radicalized in basically support of terrorism and complicit support of terrorism, that's what's really scary, right? Because yeah, what do you do with such a population?
Yeah, yeah. So if you can't shake Palestinian support for Hamas, and I mean, I expect a significant a part of that force is engendered by fear. So there's that. I mean, Hamas is bloody against its own people, so there's that. But removing that fear, if it still enjoys support, you have a significant problem. And then again, what exactly is the nature of the ideology that allows a Gazan to continue to support Hamas, being free of it, free of its technical, so a non-fear based support for Hamas. And I would want to know everything that I possibly could about how deep it is, why it exists, what's the ideological foundation for it, to find weaknesses and start attacking those weaknesses. And again, I think it's look at showing your average Palestinian, look at what you've wrought both against us, the slaughter that your men committed against a peaceful people, and the rightful retaliation, which you should expect and which your leaders knew was coming. So what do you have? You're surrounded by destruction. What does it get you? What does it earn you here on this earth? Do you care about this earth? And you find out, well, they don't. Well, then you start testing that by how much destruction really are you willing to endure? How bad of existence are you really willing to endure in the name of your ideology, in the name of your creed? When you've gone from living in a house to living in, under some debris that you found, is that enough of a change? I mean, I remember apparently my grandmother was in London during the Blitz in World War II. And I remember her recounting a story where people could take the death of a loved one on the battlefield better than they could take the destruction of their own home. It was the home that threw them a loop. And so when the Nazis were bombing cities, the civilian population bristled and was angry about it. And it was, again, the loss of something right there in front of them, their home, that they found the most outrageous. Battlefield losses could be absorbed. And if this is true, I mean, it's an anecdotal story, but if it's true, it's revealing. And I wonder, are the Gazans confronted with the same reality? Is that what's going to shake them and divest them and say, look, we're Israelis. We want a better future. The only way it works is if we all win, but you have to help us. I mean, I don't know. I'm at a loss, and it would be interesting to do a deeper dive in the Gazan psyche. I mean, again, we see the brainwashing of the children. We see the horror elements, and how prevalent is it? How deep is it? What breaks it? I guess maybe you need to hear from the Gazans themselves. Like, why don't we have a Gazan resistance to Hamas that articulates the pressure points that the West needs to push. Because I mean, that would be the most useful. We come from that culture. We understand it. We understand the psychology. We understand the philosophy. We understand the mentality. And here are the vulnerabilities. Here's the soft underbelly of their worldview and how you defeat them. And you haven't heard that. And again, all that says to me is just how bankrupt the West has allowed itself to become in articulating a vision that these resistors could identify with and effectuate their own resistance. I mean, if you and I were living in Gaza, what would we do? We'd resist. We'd probably be pretty clever and clear about it, but we would resist. And, it'd be hard. I'd say we'd probably have a body count. Not everybody would survive, but we'd still resist. We'd never tolerate it. Why do the Gazans? That's the question in my mind.
Yeah, I mean that is what is truly interesting because again, just take any European nation for that matter, right? After the Soviet Union sort of left the Eastern Bloc, it's not like the people could just change. No, they had to still stand up to their own government that was pushing it down, right? Every single communist country. And when it comes to fear, are we gonna say that East Germany or Ceausescu's Romania was better than what's going on in Gaza, the oppression by Hamas? If you take World War II example, every Axis country, Italians completely stood up to the regime. There was resistance in Germany, resistance in Yugoslavia. In my own country, Slovakia, there was a whole uprising that was suppressed.
Right.
But there was standing up everywhere, even within. We are not even talking about like, France or Poland that technically have been occupied. We are talking about like standing up to their own government, of wishes
Yeah,
of
yeah,
their
yeah, yeah,
own
yeah.
government that they might have even supported. Like I say, my own country, we elected a fascist
Yeah,
dictator.
you could question whether it's effectual, but there's always a resistance. Why don't we hear more about the Gazan resistance? I agree with you. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and I don't think it's not hearing. That seems to be any, right? That when we hear about it, it's usually very insular. And usually gets very quickly killed by Hamas. But even then, how like y you oftentimes hear this like Israel shouldn't fight Hamas or Palestinians because it just radicalizes them. You kill one person and the whole family is now against you. But how does that not happen from the other side, right? If there is a man, a boy, a woman who stands up to Hamas and gets killed, well, where is their family standing to Hamas? Where is their
right.
whole clan standing up to what Hamas is doing? And now we have, I think, few examples. I think there is one clan that is sort of like against Hamas and is to some extent, I believe, is even armed by Israel. And I think there is one more that is trying to completely separate itself from Hamas and like create new part of Gaza that would be sort of like completely separate, completely independent, and basically make peace with Israel. So we do see stories of that, but both of those stories, I think, are one is a few weeks old, one is many months old, and we didn't see anything come out of it. So we do hear sometimes when it comes to resistance, but it never seems to effectuate because, again, I think fundamentally the Palestinian population themselves, they don't feel like this is their war. They and they've been told that by the West, right? This is not war between Israel and Palestinians. Even Israel itself hasn't recognized that. This hasn't been a war between Israel and Palestinians. This was Israel and Hamas. So this doesn't bother them, right? They will get their aid, they will get their food, they will complain about it, but effectively they are viewed as a third party in this conflict.
Yeah. I don't know. I was just, when you were talking about the European examples of resistance, I was thinking, where's the Palestinian Sophie Scholl or any of them, and Yeah, well, you raise an interesting point that we could do. Is this all clan based? And so it's such an ancient way of dealing with things when it's just you're or, organizing clans around a common ideology of hating Jews or something like that. Uh, I have more questions than answers.
Somebody says third party that celebrated October 7 attacks, they are no innocent. Yeah, I'm not saying they are, but they do feel. I think everything seems to, and everybody is acting like that. Like everybody is talking about the poor, innocent Palestinian civilians that are dying. So this is something. Who told them? Which person told them no? Palestinians have to suffer or need to feel the consequences of they did. Maybe you'll hear it from like two ministers in Israeli government, and they'll be called far right, they'll be called crazy, and they have nothing to deal when it comes to actions in Gaza, so it doesn't matter. Again, I like when people quote like Smotrich about what he says about Gazans. It's like asking Scott Bessent about what he thinks about the war in Ukraine. Like, who cares? Like, he has
Yeah,
nothing to. He might be in the cabinet, but he has nothing when it comes to
right,
deal with the
right. No traction.
policy
Yeah.
of that war. Well, with that, I think we've actually covered this topic nicely, and we are coming up for a full hour. As people might have noticed, there is no reality show today, so we took the daily objective and we took it a bit longer. Nicholas, any last thoughts from you, and where can people find you?
You can find me on Substack under my name, Nicholas Provenzo, and I write for the Objective Standard often, and I'll probably be amping that up. So get some articles in the pipeline soon. And please like, share, and subscribe because that is what helps Ayn Rand Center UK continue to do what it does. And so I really encourage people to, if you got any value, if you got value out of this discussion, please share it with a friend and tell people what you saw and why you liked it or didn't like it, because that's always interesting too. I grow from criticism as well. So, by all means, please do. Thanks so much. Thanks, Daniel,
Uh,
for having me on again.
Yeah, and just quickly before we go, let me remind people about the Irreplaceable Spark Conference. It's a conference Ayn Rand Center UK is organizing later this year, October 25th and 26th in Orange County, California. Come and see how successful objectivists have used their philosophy to succeed in real life. So it's not just about talking about ideas, it's not about the abstract, but actually sort of effectuating the ideas in the real life, and you'll be able to hear from them about how they made it possible. So check out objectivism.co.uk. We recently added a few more speakers to our roster, so you can read a little bit about them as well. Thank you, Nicholas, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and the reality show. Until then, bye bye.